Episode 47, Discipline to Win podcast, here with Nick Frazetta. I'm Nick Subich. Today, we're going to talk about recapping our 2025 lessons learned. It's felt like 10 years this year. The amount of things that we've learned, the amount of things that we've trialed and erred. We still have about a month left this year that we're still actioning a ton of things, to where we really wanted to get on the podcast and try to tell the world about all the lessons we learned this year. And then we're going to do a follow-up podcast to talk about how we're going to take that and turn it into action in 2026. But Nick, if you want to go ahead and kick us off here, I know we've talked a whole lot about the themes that we're going to hit on today through other podcasts, but we've got to see it in real practice this year. And it's a lot of things have come to light for us, but just going through the different things that you have learned this year, either personally or business, that is going to shape really the beginning of next year.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we learned this year was the path that took us from 1 million in revenue to 10 million in revenue is not going to be the path that's going to take us from 10 to 100. And the growth strategy that we thought was going to continue to work is going to need to be altered a little bit. And I think it was a really valuable lesson that we were able to learn this year. And I think we're really fortunate that we learned it as early as we did because, again, we continued to grow as a firm. I think we had a really positive year in terms of moving forward, but it wasn't at the pace that we're used to. We're used to doubling the business on an annual basis, if not a quicker trajectory of growth that we've been used to over the past 4 to 5 years. So I think we learned a really, really valuable lesson in the growth strategy that we are going to alter moving forward. And I think that's a good lesson for anyone, because anytime that you're growing and you're in business, or just you personally, there's not just a one size fits all to like, I'm just going to continue to do this over and over and over, and I'm not going to innovate or change or adapt to different things that are going on. And the same, let's say, growth strategy, whether that's personal or in business, is just going to work forever. It's not. You constantly need to be adapting, learning, and understanding that at different levels, there's different ways that you're going to achieve the next goal. And think we hit one of those levels, and we figured out, it took us about 4 to 6 months to really truly figure that out, that like, wait, I think we need to change this around a little bit. This has maybe worked in the past, but in order for us to get where we're trying to go, this is what we need to do. So for me, on the business side, I think that's the biggest thing that I learned and that we learned together. I guess I'll kick it back to you if there was anything else on top of that that you learned personally or on the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody can get to 2 million of revenue just off of your bat and effort, which we did. And then we reinvented ourselves a little bit to get to, I'd say like the next step was just from like 2 to 10, or really like 3 to 10 was the next. And to just what Nick said, 10 to 100 we learned is going to be way different. And I'll say like another lesson that I learned business wise this year is your culture can be, and I'm not saying ours is perfect, but your culture can be fantastic, meaning that you have the right people in place that are displaying the right qualities, setting the right example, taking the right action, doing the right things. I've always just had the optimistic mindset of, if you just have enough people doing that, you could drop anybody into that and they're also going to assimilate to that culture, which I learned this year that's also not the case. To where in any environment I've been in, sports, the military, business up until this point, that's always been the case. But I think it gets to some level of scale where that's not the case. And that was something that I learned this year, is that not everybody can fit in or adapt to a set culture. Sometimes you have to go a step deeper. And I don't think it's actually sometimes. I think now at the level we're at, it's all the time. You have to go a step deeper into making sure that that person is a good fit for our culture. And you can't always just bet that you're going to be able to sort of convert them, assimilate them, or any of those different things. So that was another thing that I learned this year, to where, I think in business, unlike as many ways as the military and business overlap, unlike the military, where if someone doesn't do what you want them to do, you can literally take them outside and just drag them through the mud all day long until they finally gets their head. In business, it's harder than the military, I'll say, because you can't use physical punishment or like physical coercion to get things done. You have to be a lot more, I don't want to say intelligent, but you have to use a lot different types of, communication and strategy and things like that. So I'll say that was a big learning piece for me, is that not everybody can fit into a culture, even if you have enough, people that are assimilated to that. Sometimes it's just literally
And being able to get rid
not.
of that
Yeah.
too, I think it was one thing. We got rid of a lot of people, frankly, that had been with the team for a good amount of time and were definitely instrumental in getting us to from one
Mhm.
level to the next. But to your point, there was a like you have to recognize the business owner and do the difficult thing of recognizing when I like one of two things. They're either not going to adhere to the culture that you're trying to build and continue to drive forward to get to the next level,
Yep.
or sometimes it comes down to skill set where people
People
a
just
lot
hit
of
their
people
peak.
can be
Yeah.
developed, but sometimes they reach max skill set. And for you to continue to drive value to everybody else in your organization as well as the people who you're serving, you need a higher level skill set. It is. That's where I think it's a tremendous I think we've built a tremendous place where it does feel like family and our culture is like family, but at the end of the day, it's a day-to-day competition always. And we put ourselves right in the middle of that on the front lines every day where you have to be competing at a very high level. You have to be performing at a very high level. It's just like a sports team where there's guys in the NFL who were great NFL players for 3 years. And then they get to the point where they're fighting to make a roster maybe in their fifth or sixth
Right.
season because they're not performing at that level that is good enough to be able to stay on that roster. So I think that's hard to because you build personal relationships with people. People help you get from one point to another. They're serving the clients or your customers or whatnot. But being able to take a step back and look at the big picture and be like, is this person going to fit into the long-term culture? Are they going to help us get to the next level? Are they actually actively continuing to contribute to the growth, or are they maybe fighting the growth? Things like that. I think people do need to be very aware of because that can kill what you're trying to do very quickly if you have a couple of people inside of your organization that maybe aren't on that same track or
Mhm.
start to veer off of that track as you're on your growth trajectory, and just being very mindful of that I think is super important.
Yeah, I think so too. And, sort of shifting to, I'll say personal for this year, from a, challenge standpoint this year, I definitely pushed into something that I never thought I'd be able to do, doing the half Ironman this year. And I'll say that that's the most that I've physically challenged myself, really my whole life. And I think that a lot of that carried over into business and was a really positive thing and will just continue, saw how many people were tracking, outside of the organization and the positive ways it helped the organization. I'll say that like just double down on if you're in any type of spotlight or leadership position, just to continue to challenge yourself in all those different ways.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, don't regret it. It definitely sucks from a time component, which is why I
Yeah,
don't be doing it, at mass into the future because the amount of time drag on that. But there's a lot of positives in business. We always goes right into D2W and the whole culture, but just a lot of positives that overflow from just pushing yourself physically that flow into the business. And I'll say that not that I'm not operating at a high level right now, but like when you're like, training 2, 3 hours a day, like your whole business day is just like, I will say like you're at just that peak like energy and like
mhm,
testosterone. You're just like moving the whole day. I think it's just like a huge benefit to business for really anybody.
definitely. Yeah, and, yeah, I would say on the personal side of myself too, I think the big area for me that I think I grew this year was spiritually. I think at the beginning of our journey, and like leaving, like I had a strong faith when I was younger because I had like really good parents who raised me that way and really good
Hmm.
grandparents. And then you get away from that for like between like 20 and like 25, just because and there's no excuse to it, but, like, in my mind, I was like, "Oh, well, I'm
Hmm.
grinding, I'm working 7 days a week," and, like, that was, like, an area that kinda lacks, so I think that's an area that I continued to grow on this year, um, which like that was one of the things at the beginning of the year that I was like, I need to get
Mhm.
more in touch spiritually. And then same thing physically. Competing wise, like, is nothing that I've ever been interested in, and more for me, it's like just the day-to-day accountability. It's the
Mhm.
consistency aspect of just making sure that I'm getting up and I'm training every single day, no matter what is going on. Again, like, working is not an excuse for that. Like,
Yep.
having anything outside of your life is not an excuse for not being consistent, really, in any case. So, that's the thing on the physical side too that keeps me intact is, like, always be consistent no matter what it is. Like you're doing something that is going to better you in some way, shape, or form on a day-to-day basis. Um, and then I think there's things that we again learned this year personally and business wise that we want to do better for next year, which I think we're going to leave for a follow-up episode. But I would encourage anybody as you're looking back at your year, don't just like pat yourself on the back for the things that you did well. That's definitely something you should do for a short period of time, being like, yeah, okay, I grew here. Or I did this a little bit better. But where you should really spend the most time is where didn't you do well? There's definitely areas that I set out at the beginning of the year that I know I did not hit them this
Yep.
year. And that's where I'm looking at of like, why didn't I hit these? What do I need to change so that I could add this aspect to my life or train harder or gain more subject matter knowledge on certain topics that I was trying to gain knowledge on that I don't think I got to the level I needed to. Figure out why you didn't do that and then actively start preparing to make a change. Not just like you're going to write it down in your oh, this is my New Year's resolution. I'm going to do it. And then you do it for 2 weeks and then it gets like chalked because you didn't actually change anything.
Right.
You just said like, oh, I'm going to like do this. Like really think yourself through the process of like, how am I going to execute on these couple of things that I told myself at the beginning of this year I was going to do. I maybe fell short or I just didn't do them at all. How do you not have that repeat for next year? Because then if you don't do that, then you just fall into the cycle that I would say 95% of people are in where they get to the end of the year, the gym's going to be packed for the first 2 weeks of
Mhm.
January. Everyone's going to be reading a new book at the beginning of January. Everyone has this new lifestyle at the beginning of January. And then by the time March hits, the gym's empty again. That you don't see, people are right back to their old life. So don't allow that to be you, would be my message of people closing out the year of like, yes, pat yourself on the back, recognize what you did well, but really focus on what you didn't do well and how you're going to change that going into the next year.
Yeah, and, like, there's no reason also not to start now too of whatever you
Yeah.
wanna do. Of, like, a lot of people, quite frankly, we make fun of most people in business because, like, post next week, 90% of corporate America is checked out. They're O's. They're out of office. When they're in office, it's just focused on the holidays. There's nothing going on, where right now we are firing on every possible cylinder on making next year another 300-400% growth year for the firm and us. And I would just encourage anybody, be aware of everybody else in your surroundings, your competitors. We are hyper vigilant on our competitors and our surroundings. And when you focus and you're firing on all cylinders when everybody else is on the couch, like,
Yeah.
that's where you really make leaps and bounds, because like the market, the world, the economy, your competitors, like, you cannot underestimate them, and you have to just continue to press, continue to push, because a quarter of like, if we went complacent for a quarter, like, I have no idea what would happen with the business.
Yeah.
So, like, you cannot just chalk November and December and expect to come out competing in 26, because there are people like us that are gonna kick your ass.
Like we will steamroll you because you have no momentum.
Yeah,
Like you'll, especially if you have momentum, that's even scarier. Is if
yeah.
like, if you have momentum, you can never afford to lose it. And that's why I think, keep going harder every single week, month, years, because momentum is very, very valuable of just continuing to keep that momentum going. And you like sitting up in your chair and be like, oh, we like grew 50% this year, 100%. And like, I'm good now. Like, I'm
Yeah,
making like some good money. And like, I think I'm good. Like, you're going to get
yeah,
smoked. Like, you're going to get smoked by somebody who's hungrier behind you, who, yeah, maybe they're 2 years behind you, but they catch that momentum and then they keep pushing through that momentum, you're gonna get left in the dust. I think that's where a lot of people just get to a level and they feel comfortable or that like they did a good job, and you have a lot of people like, oh, you're doing such a good job, like, and people kind of take their foot off the gas, like you cannot afford to do that. The momentum is so valuable, and losing momentum is it's detrimental to any growing business.
We've grown to 87% year to date, and I'm looking in the mirror
Like
like
we
pissed off. Yeah, pissed off because we had like huge objectives this year, and we get out in front of the company Jan 1 every year, lay out our strategy, our game plan, like how we're going to hit those objectives. And like had much larger objectives for where we'd be, than where we're at right now. Most people, if they're growing 10 to 15% a year, like celebrating, they're taking off all of Q4,
yeah.
where it's like, we're going to learn from why we only grew 87% this year. Probably going to wrap up at not closer to 90 or 95 and come out next year. And like, we are actually going to grow to 250% next year
Mhm.
because of the lessons we learned this year and the sacrifices we've made. So, definitely self reflect, be your harshest critic. Um, and actually come out firing not just Jan 1 right now because everybody else that's a serious competitor is, and they are trying to take what is yours, and we are always operating that there is someone trying to take what is ours. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for part 2 to this. We're going to lay out the map, the game plan to beat all of your competitors and to come out firing on every cylinder in 2026 and beyond. Till next
Awesome.
time, stay disciplined.